Hi everyone, my name is Lara from LK Yoga, and today I'm going to be talking you through the pose Downward Facing Dog. Downward Facing Dog is a classic yoga pose which I'm sure most people with even minimal yoga experience would have some idea of what they're doing. But even so that it's such a well-known pose doesn't mean it's necessarily always done in quite the right way. So today I'd like to share with you some of my favourite tips for the pose to help you find the sort of version of the pose that works best for you. So first thing we're going to talk about is our hand placement. So when I'm in downward facing dog, I take my hands to sit roughly between the two placement markers on my mat. So my fingertips are just starting to rest out over the top of the line, and my palm is just spread slightly so that it's coming just below the bottom of the second placement line markers. From here we spread the fingers nice and wide, and to get an idea of how wide you want the hands, if you come down to the line on your mat, you want your hands to be sort of just resting so that the index finger is sitting underneath the shoulders, more or less. We want the hands reasonably wide, and this is just as we press up to cobra or come up from upward facing dog, roughly where our hands would be, to then press our way back to downward facing dog. So that if you then have a look at where your fingers align relative to your placement markers, particularly the little finger, how that sits in regards to the edge of the placement lines, that can be a good indicator for you that you're roughly in the right position. And from here what we're going to do is we're going to spread the fingers nice and wide, so we're going to press each finger and the thumb into the mat. And as we do this, you should also be grounded through the back of the hand. You'll feel that there's a sort of lift almost underneath the knuckles. This is called Hasta Bandha. It's a hand block. And for poses such as downward facing dog, if you don't do it quite right, maybe not the biggest deal in the world, you'll have more tension going up through your arms as you're fighting the sort of force of pressing forward. Whereas if you're in like a arm balance or a handstand or something like that, and it's really key to get this hand balancing technique really like spot on, because as you transfer the weight a little bit forward, you can press in for the fingers and drive yourself back again. So it's just like a little balance point, but it's something that we can start working on even from our downward facing dog. So taking those hands nice and wide, pressing the fingers in, the thumb, slight pocket of air underneath the knuckles, and pressing into the base of the hand. Then from here we're going to lift the hips up towards the ceiling. So we're going to work the heels towards the ground. Don't worry if they're not quite touching. That is a very minor thing that maybe over time you'll come closer to that position. But you know, it's one of those things that your yoga practice isn't rubbish just because your heels don't touch the ground. Like, that is complete nonsense. If you've got a slight bend in the back of the legs, slight bend behind the knees, also totally fine if you're quite tight in the hamstrings. Throughout class, you're going to work towards pressing the heels down a little bit more. They still might not touch, lifting the hips nice and high, and maybe straightening the legs ever so slightly. But you've got to work with what your body, what feels comfortable in your body, and sort of not focus about sort of obsessing over like the perfect pose. I mean, it's not like we're trying to get into full splits or something like that. We just want to find a pose that feels comfortable and works for us, and has sort of good alignment, good form. So anyway, so we're going to lift the hips up towards the sky and press the heels down. So I keep a very slight bend in my elbows here just to help me build a little bit of strength in my arms. So just like avoiding sort of locking out, and that's just nice, keeps building a bit of strength through the shoulders, through the arms. We're going to press the heels down, lift the hips nice and high. We want the back to be lovely and long, and the neck in line with the spine. So I'm gazing roughly towards the center placement mark on my mat, the LK Yoga logo. But I can also sort of gaze very slightly towards the toes, and within that sort of position, my ears are sort of in line with my elbows. That means my neck is nice and long. What I don't want to be doing is looking up towards my groin or towards my hands. The number of people that look at their hands, and if you just quickly look at the position of my neck when I'm looking at my hands, it's all scrunched up around my shoulders. So that's not good. That's not what we want to do. In pretty much all our yoga poses, we want to keep the spine lovely and long, and the neck nice and long in line with the spine. You very rarely want to, unless you're twisting the head to gaze in a certain direction, you don't really most of the time want to be doing this or this. Certain poses maybe, but in general, we try and keep the neck nice and long and avoid too much tension in the shoulders. So also in downward facing dog, something we can start to work on when we've got that sort of key base foundation shape, which I'll just show you again. So when we've worked on that sort of positioning, we can start to look at some more subtle cues. So if you're a total beginner to yoga, feel free to listen to this, but don't worry about these subtle details quite yet. So when we are actually in our downward facing dog, we sort of got a sort of twisting action that's going on through the arms here. So one thing one of my yoga teachers always used to say is, if you imagine you're in downward facing dog with the arms up overhead, the engagement that we want to get through the back is a bit like twisting our arms in. So what we're doing is we're activating the lats, these back muscles here. We're going to start squeezing them ever so slightly whilst we're pressed out in our downward facing dog. And what this is going to do for engaging them, if you look at my arms, is my hands are going to turn in slightly. But obviously when our hands are on the mat, they're flat out in front of us with the fingers facing forward. So we're not like this in our downward facing dog, or like this. So what we want to do is start to squeeze and open and sort of create a nice dome shape almost in the back in our downward facing dog. So we're activating the back muscles. And all this means is that we're going to just have a slight sort of twist in the hands. So our hands are almost going to twist inwards. So our inner elbows are going to start to point forward. That's the kind of action that we want to think about to counteract this back engagement. So our hands are still facing forward. It sounds very complicated, but if you just come into a downward facing dog, all I want you to think about doing is sort of slightly broadening through the back, and then just making sure as the arms sort of turn that we draw the elbows back in. So hopefully that makes sense. We're just going to give them like a little squeeze back towards the centre. Nothing too crazy, just a gentle squeeze whilst we engage the back muscles. So that's just a very subtle cue to help you build some really good upper body strength in your downward facing dog and really get the most that you can out of the pose. So don't worry if you feel a bit overwhelmed by all those cues. The key pointers really are just to try and lift the hips nice and high. We want to create that sensation of space in the lower back and at the hip, the hamstring sort of glute insertion point. So this sort of part of the upper leg. And we want to press the hands nice and firmly into the ground. We want the hands to be sort of just sort of at this kind of distance with our shoulders on the mat. And then just as you continue to practice over time, just try micro-stepping the toes in. So that's something I cue in my class when my yogis are sort of maybe 10-15 minutes into class, a little bit warmer. I'll say just try stepping the toes in ever so slightly in your downward facing dog. And all this does is help you to get a little bit more of a stretch through the legs. So what you're doing by stepping in is forcing the heels back ever so slightly if you don't change any of the other angles. So it's literally like a micro step, like half a toe length. Just see if you can step in a little bit and keep those hips nice and lifted. And then maybe you're just going to get a little bit more stretch from the hamstrings all the way down the back of the legs. So I'll just show you one more time, pressing up into my downward facing dog, lifting the hips nice and high, and then I would maybe micro step in as I got warmer through class, just to intensify the sensation of the pose. In terms of the back placement markers for the feet, I generally start off, I'm 5'4", so I'm not the tallest yogi in the world. I generally start with my heel roughly in line with the first foot marker, so not the outer one, the inner one, and then my hands are spread so that my fingers are only just over the top, the outer marker. So obviously, depending on your height and flexibility, you're going to be a bit different in terms of your placement. There's no sort of strict place for everyone because everyone's body is so different. So you just use these placement markers to sort of act as your mirror, as it were, to give you an idea of your form and a comparison. So as you're coming in and out of poses during class, you know that you're kind of roughly creating the same shape in terms of the base position. So hopefully that has been helpful for you. Please do give us a shout out and pop me a message. My name's Lara. You can get in contact with me via our YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, or by email, which can be found on our website. So just pop a message, "Hi Lara," at the top, and it will find its way to me. Alternatively, just go and speak to your local yoga teacher. I've said this before, but it's like I've yet to meet an unfriendly yoga teacher, so just go and ask them some questions if you've got any, and they'd be more than happy to help, I am more than sure. So anyway, have a great day, and hopefully see you soon. Namaste.